Is it Haime?
It
That's how you
is.
pronounce it? Okay, awesome.
You've got
Well,
it. Yeah. It could be pronounced, it's been pronounced many different ways, Jeremy, but
yeah.
Haim is the way to do it.
All right, sounds good.
Yeah.
All right, well, welcome John Haime to the show. I'm excited to have you here.
Thanks, Jeremy. It's always awesome to share ideas. And I know your podcast is relatively new, so that's exciting too to kind of get things started in your podcast. And I'm sure you'll have a great career in podcasting too.
Awesome. Thanks, man. I wanted to dive in right away and just ask, in your opinion, what a high performer is. What is that to you?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, you can look at that question, I think, in many different ways, but a high performer is someone who probably sets a target and then achieves the target in a defined way, I would say, too. Not just hitting the target, but hitting it in a very defined way. The way they plan they're going to reach it. And I would also say, too, regarding high performers, there's a level of consistency too that kind of runs through that moniker. So if you are a high performer, yes, you have the ability to excel, and you do excel probably in your craft, whatever that is. But you're also consistent too, which I think is a big attachment to that moniker, because anybody can be a high performer for maybe a short amount of time, but the real true high performers are quite consistent and bring it, I guess you'd say, with respect to high performance on a sustainable level.
Yeah, I guess is that kind of why they're always preaching about how important good habits are, is just so you can remain that consistent component and keep going?
Yeah, habits are, and we're learning more about habits. I don't know if you've seen James Clear's book, Atomic Habits. It's quite a good book, but the old sort of thinking on habits has been to either break your habit or build a habit. It's been 21 days. But that's been smashed up quite a bit by the new research saying that it takes a lot longer to build a habit. In fact, on average, it takes about 66 days, and it can take up to 250 days to build a habit. So
Wow.
habits are a big part of it, and you need that sort of discipline and sustainability to stay with it and continue to build the habit. So obviously, high performers have good habits or great habits. Part of that would be the discipline of being able to develop the habits and develop, what they need to do to master their craft. So yeah, habits are a big part of it, Jeremy, for sure. And it takes longer than people think. So people can remember that, who's ever listening to the podcast, that it's not the 21 days that when I was playing professional golf, all the sports psychs and the performance people would tell me that it takes 21 days to build a habit, 3 weeks, or break a habit. And that's not the truth. It takes much longer than that. So
Hmm.
you really have to stay with it. And for all my clients, I always recommend that not only do you have to stay with it, you have to be very patient with yourself too, because it really does take time for these things to evolve and build these habits. So, and like I said, it could take up to 200 days, which is hard to believe, isn't it? But that is a number that has been put out there by the researchers. So, and I've also seen 250 days too. So I think the bottom
Really
line is it takes a lot longer than people think to build a habit, for sure.
interesting. And with that habit building, why is it so difficult for us? Do you understand that portion, or is that what they're still trying to figure out?
Well, I think it's the discipline factor to be able to stay with it. And the whole idea, I mean, we can get into comfort zone and those sorts of things too, but the comfort factor too, and pushing yourself to the edges really is what you're trying to do, right? So it's difficult to, once you get comfortable with something, it's difficult. People aren't good with change. So you have to be able to push up against those edges. And when you're changing a habit or breaking a habit, that's exactly what you're doing. You're sort of pushing up against the edges of the comfort zone. When I talk about comfort zone with athletes, I just wrote a book for equestrians. And one of the chapters I wrote about comfort zone, because people are always interested in it. They always ask me about it and what is it? And is it real? And when I write articles, I get all sorts of feedback from articles that I write on comfort zone. But if you think about if you think about a circle and a person's comfort zone, if you look at it in terms of space, so most people are in a very confined space. If you're in a comfort zone or you're in an area of comfort, you're in a quite a confined space. So your job is to grow out that circle. If you talk about it in terms of a shape, your job is to push up against the edges. So you're making the size of the circle bigger. So within that, there's growth within that circle. Then there's more confidence, there's more everything. So I would say with respect to the habits, you really have to push up against the edges of that comfort zone and take some risks and try things and try new things, because that's really the only way to do it. So
Mhm.
yeah, it's the comfort zone factor, I think, is in alignment with the habits and why it's difficult, like you asked, why it's difficult to break the habits or build the habits. It just takes discipline to do it, and it takes courage to do it too. You have to push up against those edges of the comfort zone and grow that circle that I'm talking about.
Mhm. One thing that comes to mind with you talking about comfort zone is that kind of what superstitions and routines are about? You know, like you read or you hear about something like Sidney Crosby wearing the same hat his entire career. Is that him trying to put some sort of normalcy and comfort in an ever-changing, I guess, situation that's always going to be different?
Yeah, and I think superstitions, do they work? Like technically or scientifically, no, but do they work for the individual? Do they believe, if they believe that wearing that hat will help them play better, then believe me, put the hat on.
Yeah.
I think it's a probably a positive thing for them, but yeah, I think superstitions. What's the other one you mentioned too? Superstitions and
Routines, just kind of like getting into the zone and, listening to a favorite
well,
song before a performance, that sort of thing.
yeah, routines are really critical. One of the chapters I actually wrote about, which is critical to confidence, is the whole idea of preparation and knowing what works for you when you go into a performance. So the interesting thing about that, Jeremy, routines and preparation and everything, is that everyone is so different. Like, if you use, let's just use, because a lot of Canadians love the NHL, we use professional hockey players, and I have some professional hockey player clients, and they're all so incredibly different. Some like to sit in the locker room before and not say a word. They just tape their stick, they'll go out into the rink, they'll sit, they'll watch, they might do a little visualization work, and they're quite quiet. You'll have other guys who want to play soccer and knock the ball around and be physical. You'll have some people who want to listen to music. They'll have their headphones on. You'll have some people want to tell jokes to, get themselves in that sort of right performance mindset. So routines, yeah, are really critical, but you have to know which ones work for you. It's really key. And everyone's so different. It's not like you can copy somebody's routine, because everybody's personality is different, everybody's makeup is different, everybody's emotional sort of makeup is different too. So yeah, you just have to find the right one for you. So it's really interesting though, because a lot of people say, okay, I'll just copy Sydney's routine, for example,
Yeah.
a hockey player, right? But what Sydney does is not necessarily going to work for you. You really have to understand how to get yourself in the right mindset to play your best or excel.
Hmm. And I guess what they're doing is it getting themselves into just a familiar place, and feeling comfortable and confident, and like I've always had difficulty explaining exactly what that zone is that you're trying to get to. So like, what is that zone to you?
Well, in my opinion, the zone is very elusive. I don't think you can necessarily put yourself in a zone, but you can put yourself in the best possible position to try to achieve the zone or get into the flow during the game. So you have to go with what works for you. So, for example, if a player has his best game ever, what do they do before that game, for example, to play their best? What steps did they take from the time they left the house to the time they went to Subway and got a coffee or whatever they did? retrace all of that and go back and see what actually worked. But the zone per se, people say you can, I've been doing this a long time, and people say that you can just jump into the zone, but the zone is very elusive. If it was something that you could jump into right away, every PGA Tour golfer would shoot 65 every day, but that's just not the way it works, right?
Yeah.
Some days or some weeks you find it, and you really get into where everything clicks, the confidence level is high, your preparation is really good, and it just works technically, physically, strategically, mentally, emotionally. It all comes together, but it's rare for that to happen. But you have to try to get yourself in the best possible position to do it as much and as often as you possibly can, and you do that through good routine and good habits.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I always encourage. I say you can't really control getting in the zone. That just will happen some weeks, some days. I mean, the sports is and performance is very cyclical. Some days you have it and some days you don't. It's just the feelings, and there's so many factors attached to it. But the routines and the preparation can really help you maybe get into it more often if you have the right routine and the right habit. But yeah, we could have a whole podcast actually on that zone thing, the
Mm-hmm.
zone idea. I think a lot of people sort of have preached that they can get people into the zone, but I have never really been able to. If I could get a PGA Tour player to shoot 65 every day, I would, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or an ATP player, ATP tennis player to win every tournament or to get to the finals of every tournament. But there's just too many factors to be able to find that zone all the time. But it's fun when you get in it. Like, I play professional sports myself, and it's super fun when you're in it, but then it's gone. It disappears. And then you're looking for it again, and you're trying to give yourself the best possible chance always. And that's my job, as what I do, is to give myself the client or the athlete, the executive, whatever it is, to get into that place as much as they possibly can. So, but it's elusive, that's for sure.
Yeah, I like that in your book, You're a Contender, that you talk about how it's not just athletes, it's business, it's parenthood,
Everything.
yeah. Well,
Yeah, it's everything. I think that the skills that a person, so I'll give you an example. If I'm working with a young athlete, the skills that they need to acquire, especially the structural pieces of performance and confidence, which are the self-discovery pieces, right? These really, really important pieces, creating a value structure so that your behaviors are consistent and your actions are consistent. Developing your purpose, why you're doing it, and knowing that and having that front and center all the time. Understanding your strengths and limitations and triggers, and understanding really your emotional makeup and how it works, and the messaging that your emotions are sending to you. Do you understand why they're happening? And then how to regulate your emotions too, which is really critical piece of self-awareness. So if you can really understand and work on those pieces when you're young, you can imagine the type of success you can have later on. You've already acquired and developed these skills, which are the key skills in performance and getting to the next level. So if you can acquire these skills, and I always say that to parents too, Jeremy, when I'm starting with their sons or daughters in any particular sport, could be anything, that the skills they will acquire from developing these fantastic, skills through their passion, which is their sport, are directly transferable to everything they do. And you're completely right. Sports, business, the arts, parenting, everything. It's really all performance based. You're really trying to achieve something. You're trying to reach a target. You have a goal. And the whole process of getting there, and the growth process and the learning process, is all about these really critical pieces that you can learn. And self-awareness certainly is massive. I'm huge, as you saw in the You're a Contender book, right? I wrote that book just as an introduction for people to self-awareness. And here's what you have to do. Here's step one: self-awareness or self-discovery. And there's a lot attached to self-awareness and self-discovery. It's so much really understanding yourself. The emotional makeup is a big part of it. So yeah, so it's like you were saying, it's transferable to everything. Like
Hmm.
performance is across the board. And when I first started, funny little story here, if you have a minute. I I started coaching executives. I played professional sports and I played professional golf for a number of years. Growing up, I was a top rank amateur, and then I went to school on a scholarship, and then I turned professional and played professional golf for about 6.5 years. Um, but coaching executives for me was the sort of the background to come back to coach the other performers too, so athletes, and the crossover is incredible. It's much more difficult, I would say, in my opinion, from doing all of it. The corporate piece is difficult because there's so many moving parts and so many factors to coaching an executive, and so much responsibility, and people are attached to it, and there's so many more emotions and everything than uh, coaching a young athlete. Often, when I first started coaching athletes, and I was doing a bunch of education on the side, psych education, emotional intelligence education, communication education, all the pieces I need to be good at what I do in the other pieces too, sports and the arts. But people would ask me when I coach their young athlete, "Can you do this?" And I'd sort of laugh and I say, "Well, like this is not even close to coaching an executive. Like coaching an executive, it's just so much more difficult, and there's so many more moving parts." So yeah, that's my experience. But yeah, it's across the board for sure.
Yeah, totally. And you kind of mentioned that your value structure kind of is the basis of everything. Now, why is that? Like I'm trying to put myself back into my past where, I mean, I went to university for music. I was a drummer, and I remember my mindset at the time was I just want to be the best drummer out there. But I was 17 in a university full of 25, 26-year-olds who've been playing for 10 years longer than me. And I think my mindset back then was wrong because I was comparing myself to these people rather than just worrying about my performance in front of me. And I think that because I had this ultimate goal of wanting to just be the biggest rock star ever, this immature 17-year-old mindset, it kind of
That's
got in the way.
normal. Yeah, that's normal though, for sure.
Yeah. I guess what I'm asking though is like, what are there healthy values like and unhealthy values, do you know what I mean, that kind of contradict or help?
You have to decide what's important to you. So, what do you believe in is the big thing. So, if I'm constructing a value structure for an executive or an athlete or an artist, whatever it is, that's a core piece of the puzzle. So, I ask them, okay, what is important to you and what do you want to work on? So, it could be confidence. Confidence might be extremely important to them. So we include that as a value to build that. So that's a developmental opportunity. So, or it could be something else. Being professional, for example, if you're a drummer, you want to be professional in what you do every night. You want to go out and you want to give your best possible performance, right? So what does that mean to be professional? So then you start attaching all these behaviors on what it looks like to be professional. So what does it look like to be professional? Well, you're always on time, you're practicing with quality, you're doing all these. There could be 12, 15 different steps that I would include for an athlete or an executive. And then you have to live those every day. You can't just write them down, but the values include, okay, what do I believe in? What is most important to me? So it could be there's thousands of values. So I sit down and we sort of narrow them down maybe to about 10 or 12, and then we narrow them down typically to 4. Right now, what is most important to you in order for you to get to where you want to go? Because my job is always closing the gap. Where are you now? Where do you want to go? So my job is to close the gap for them and get them to where they want to go.
Hmm.
So part of that is the behaviors during that period of how are they going to behave. And I have everybody that I work with has their values either posted wherever they are, in their locker, at home, on their phone, always in front of them on the home page. This is what I believe in. And these are the behaviors that help me action those values. It's really critical. I can't stress enough on this podcast that if you really formulate the values properly and you live them every day, how you can really make a massive change and make a big difference. So the purpose and why you're doing it, first of all, to formulate that is really important, because a lot of people don't know why they're doing something. And I think you have to know why you're doing it, because that has to be front and center. There are so many distractions in performance, and there's stuff coming outside of you all the time. So I always work off a premise where you're always working from inside out, it's called. So you build the structure on the inside, and that's expressed outwardly. And the opposite happens with a lot of athletes, where they work outside in, where they're taking all the nonsense and all the distractions and all the drama from outside, and it builds inside of them. So that becomes what they express. So if you can kind of follow that, but the values are a big part of that. If you can express your values every day, those are a structural part of you. You build them, they become a part of you. That's what you're expressing every day. So you're expressing from the inside out. So I would say that like values, it's a bit of a cliche thing. I want to build values, or I believe in this, but they are not. They are a structural piece. And if you do them properly, you know, you walk into a company often and you'll say, these are our values. But the problem is that they have values, but they just sit on a piece of paper, and they don't have them actioned out where they're living those values every day. They may believe in them. They may say, those are our values. They look great on our wall, don't they? But they don't action them, and they don't have specific behavioral steps to action those values each day. So values, the other thing is too, for values, is that if you know what you believe in, it's so much easier to make a decision. So if you have things coming at you all day long, you're trying to make decisions. How do you make decisions if you don't really know what you believe in? You're all over the place. So that's why you really have to determine what it is you believe in. And then it's much easier to make a decision too, and a quicker decision, which is vital in business. You have to be able to make a decision quickly. So, but first you have to know what you believe in order to make the decision. So,
yeah, that's really interesting. I was trying to put it all together, and that makes sense, that it's always the decisions that you're having to make, the values that you set, and your why kind of give you that compass in terms of like the direction that you want to go, and then there's less
always.
kind of debate, you know.
And those are all structural pieces that you have to have, like in when you look at, I just wrote the book on confidence, and when you look at confidence, for example, the self-awareness piece, or the structural piece, the self-discovery piece with the values and the purpose and everything, are critical. If you want to be a confident athlete, you have to have those built. And then what we talked about earlier, the preparation, the routine, the training, how you train. Do you train with quality? How do you train? All those things are critical too. And then the third piece for me always, and this brings in sort of a new area that we haven't talked about yet, but that's the biggest piece, in my opinion, in confidence probably. And it's quite a bit in alignment with the structural piece of the self-discovery. It's the narrative, it's your own voice. And that voice is just so big from my 20 years of doing this. The voice really, it comes down to the voice and the stories you tell yourself, and the narrative, and where that narrative comes from, and how you shape that narrative, that really impacts performance in a major way. Because ultimately, you could train all you want, you can have values and everything, but at the last second, if the voice isn't telling you the right things and it's creating doubt, then that's a problem for you. So that voice piece. So the structural, the three, when I wrote this last book, I talked about the core pieces of confidence. One of them being the self-discovery or the self-awareness. So what we just talked about, values, purpose, strengths, limitations, knowing all these fantastic things about yourself. the training and preparation and being able to having a systematic way and a process to do that properly. A lot of people, they don't know how to train. It's not systematic. It's not process oriented, and they waste a lot of time doing it. And then the preparation piece that we talked about, do you know what the best way for you to prepare is? And is it consistent each time you do it? And then the final core piece is that voice. That hopefully the voice is telling you the right things, right? And you shape it properly, because that's the final judge, really. When push comes to shove under pressure, that voice has to be telling you the right messages.
What if it's not?
Well, then you have to reshape it.
Yeah.
You have to understand. I mean, that's why you hire somebody like me to help you reshape it, understand it. Where does it come from? Why is it telling you what it's telling you? And then to make sure that you're interpreting it properly and it's telling you the truth. And sometimes it's telling you the truth, but it's not telling you what you want to hear. If you haven't trained enough and you've been lazy and you don't have the discipline, and then at the final moment, the voice pops up and says, hey, you can't do this. The voice may be right?
Mm-hmm.
But you have to decipher the truth in the voice. That's your job always. Is the voice telling you the truth? But if you have done the training, for example, if you have done the training, kind of the reverse of that, if you have done the training, you have worked hard at it, you have prepared, you've done everything you possibly can do to get ready. Your coach has said, hey, we're ready to roll here, right? This is the time to do it. And then the voice at the last second pops up and says, hey, maybe I'm not ready. Maybe I'm not ready to do this. You really need to understand that you have to push back on the voice and have a little conversation with the voice and say, look, you're not telling me the truth here, because I have done the work. My coach tells me I'm ready. And it's a factual discussion almost, right? I am ready. I'm really good. I'm confident. I've done all the training. I've done the preparation. I am ready to roll. So that's the skill in being able to regulate and manage that voice. It's a big piece of the puzzle in the whole, certainly in the confidence factor and in the performance factor too. It's a big piece of the puzzle. But it's a really good question you asked. What happens if the voice, is telling you, hey, I can't do it? Mm-hmm. Well, it's your job to really sort of pull out the truth. What is the truth in the voice? And sometimes it won't be telling you the truth.
Yeah, I think so let's say you're golfing. I think golf is such an amazing example because you're in your head the entire time, right? So let's say you have prepared, you've done all the work, your coach tells you you're ready, and like you mentioned, sometimes you just don't show up, right? And let's say you're not showing up. It kind of brings to mind in your book, you talk about the 90-second rule. Can you talk a little bit about the 90-second rule?
Actually, the research now has significantly kind of pulled that back down, and I use 10 seconds actually. Okay. But I think the important thing, whether you use 90 seconds, 10 seconds, 40 seconds, 32 seconds, whatever you use, there's an option there for you to regulate your emotions. So if you're talking about emotions, if the emotions start heating up inside of you and building up, an emotion. Here's something interesting on emotion. So what's really cool, Jeremy, if people go and look at, there's a woman by the name of a researcher on emotions called Lisa Feldman Barrett. And she's done some phenomenal research in her lab. I think it's in Boston, on completely switching the mindset of what emotions are and how emotions work. Physically and psychologically. So when you talk about the 90-second rule, an emotion when it begins in your brain, it works down physically, and literally it fizzles out in your body in about 10 seconds. So physically, think about this. Physically, the emotion is gone in about 10 seconds. So emotions morph into feelings. So feelings and emotions are different, right? Okay. So the way that feeling can continue is if you think about it. So if it's an emotion you don't want, you're irritated, you're angry, you're frustrated, or whatever, you always have the choice to change the channel. And you have that very small amount or that window to change the channel. And that but you may want it to continue. You may be experiencing something great, joy, happiness, these great feelings, and you say, I'm just going to let the circuit run. I'll keep thinking about it and I'll just let it run. But you really have to change the channel on the thinking piece, because the more you think about it, the more that circuit will continue to run, that emotional circuit, the more the chemicals will be dumped into your body, and the more that feeling will continue. So you have to be careful with that. It's like the person who is driving along in their car, they get cut off in the morning, and they get really angry and mad, and all the way to work, they're thinking about the guy who cut them off, and the terrible feeling continues, right? And it literally could continue all day if you can't stop thinking about it. So it's really critical to be able to change the channel, switch the channel, think about something else. And this is not only for sport or performance, this is for everything. This is for relationships. I mean, people let emotions run for so long sometimes, and anger, frustration, hesitation, all these things. So you have to be really aware of that kind of, that emotional response in your body.
So let's say you do get cut off in traffic and you're kind of pissed off, how do you stop that thought pattern,
You have to kind of get the thinking piece of the brain into another rhythm. So think about like the 10 favorite songs that you have. You have to, it's changing the channel. Athletes always ask me, how do you change the channel? Great, John, fantastic. I love the science, I love the research and everything, but how do you change the channel? You have to change the channel. You have to figure out your own way to do it. So I might recommend, I was just working with a young equestrian actually today. We were talking about that. So I talked to her about maybe thinking of all the favorite horses she knows in the industry that start with C, or that start with F, or start with D, or start with whatever, or her favorite songs on her playlist, but it's getting the mind, that thinking part of the brain, that front part of the brain, to be thinking differently. And it's like you're changing the channel. So that's the
give
way
it some sort of challenge.
you have to give the thinking brain something to do. So you give it, and otherwise it'll just keep on with the same thing. So you have to give it something different. So it could be the 10 best songs. It could be, your 10 favorite flowers. It could be something like that, can work for you and get you to change the channel. But that's key, though, to be able to regulate that and to change that channel.
Yeah. Even just recognizing that you are pissed off is kind of hard. Do you know what I mean? I'm starting to realize that that's what meditation is for. And that's what everybody's preaching meditation is so amazing for, is recognizing that you do have a thought. And when you have that thought, it will continue to develop into an emotion, and then that emotion develops into a feeling. So if you practice meditation, what you're doing is practicing noticing that you're pissed off, because sometimes you just don't even know that you're pissed off and you're just pissed off, right?
Well, that's the mindfulness piece too. And again, it's self-awareness again, Jeremy. So you have to understand your triggers. I mean, part of self-awareness is understanding what triggers that negative emotion inside of you. So I would sit with an athlete or an executive or an artist or something, and we would write down every possible scenario that they know of anyway, that they're aware of, that could piss them off or would make them angry or make them frustrated. So I think the awareness always is the first part of it. And mindfulness meditation is something that I always recommend to all of my athletes and any performer. On the breath, certainly, to be able to calm yourself down and regulate and keep yourself in the moment, but also to be able to recognize how you're thinking and watch those thoughts go by. And there's just so many benefits to mindfulness meditation. We could spend actually another podcast just on that piece too, which I would highly recommend, because if people do get into a small, and it's not a big commitment, that's the other thing. And there's so many great apps now like all of the athletes use Headspace or one of the ones that I have a list of them that I recommend typically, but I like Headspace because it has some sort of sport oriented modules around them, so they
Oh,
can,
cool.
yeah, so it is cool. But yeah, no, you're completely right though. The awareness piece is the big part of it. If you,
Hmm.
I mean, most people are just drowning in a sea of emotions because they don't have that or they don't have the awareness piece. Once you're aware of it, then you can regulate it. But if you're not aware of it, it's difficult to regulate it. So
Yeah.
that's the thing.
And obviously, you want to recognize negative emotions and get rid of those negative thoughts, right? But let's say you are killing it and you're super excited and um, you're feeling a lot of joy, right? Do you
Keep it
want to
going.
regulate that? Do you want to not let yourself feel too high? Because you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah, I mean, there's a performance. There's a sort of a sweet spot in performance, right? You don't want to be too high, too
yeah.
relaxed, too low. And again, it comes down to self-awareness. You have to know where that place is for you. And but you want to also. I love when my athletes have a great, whether it's a great moment, it's a great shot, it's a great piece of performance, whatever it is. I think it's really important to experience that, experience the joy in it, and express it. On the other side too, I think it's fine. Like emotions are not good or bad; they're just messaging.
Mhm.
Your body is telling you something. We need to do this. We need to focus on that. We need to go here. We need to do that. So sometimes people think that negative emotions are bad and positive emotions are good. That's not the truth. All emotions are good. They're all messaging and they're all telling you something.
Mm.
So the most recent chapter. That's why I love the new work done by Lisa Feldman Barrett, because she talks a lot about the construction of emotions too. There's no such thing as the reptilian brain, the hardwiring of emotions. That doesn't exist. It's been proven that that doesn't exist. We construct emotions based on our situation and what situation we're in, and we create the emotions sort of in real time. So your body creates them. So that's the fascinating part of the new research. It was always sort of known that emotions are hardwired, especially the negative emotions are hardwired into our brain, this reptilian brain, that we have, that we have these things hardwired in, but that's really not the truth. The truth is that we create and construct emotions. So it's
Interesting.
fascinating. Yeah, oh,
Yeah.
it's super fascinating, this new research, and it's so great that people like her and Joseph Ledoux and all these people are doing this great research so they can help people like me do my job better too, right?
Yeah.
Which is fantastic, because there's a big difference between telling an athlete or having them understand that it's actually hardwired and there's nothing you can do about it, or your body actually constructs it and creates it. So yes, you're in control and there's something you can do about it.
Yeah, no kidding. I've always been fascinated by watching, I don't know, some of the best athletes like Connor McDavid in the NHL or Kawhi Leonard in the NBA. They always just kind of seem to be like cool, calm, and collected. And I've always kind of wondered, yeah, like, are they managing their highs so they can also manage their lows, or are they just managing the lows, But then they hit that last buzzer beater, and then you see the emotion erupt. So,
Yeah, well, like I said, I love when athletes. I really discourage athletes from trying to keep everything inside. I think it's really great. Like, I don't know if you know some of these golfers, but there was a couple of years ago, there was a golfer by the name of Jordan Spieth. He talks to himself a lot and he
hmm,
expresses himself. So he gets really mad. But it's mad only in short bursts.
10
So
seconds.
right, right. The 10-second rule, right?
Yeah.
So can you get mad, or are you allowed to get mad? Of course, you're a human being. Get mad, express it responsibly,
Hmm.
but get mad. It's okay to get mad. But you don't want it to sort of interfere with the next piece of your process, which is the next shot. So the next shot may be great. Then celebrate it. Great. I love it. you know, Yahoo, you know, I did well, I hit a good one or whatever. So I think that's okay too. But again, just express it and then move on to your process and get into that rhythm of where you need to be and then that gets into results and process and everything. So you're always trying to, we talked about mindfulness, you're always trying to, if possible, the best scenario is to be able to be in the moment always, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so you're in the moment, you're always playing or performing in the moment that you're in. You're not performing in another moment, which is very distracting. Or, you know, they say that fear creeps in on either side of the present moment. So, and that's true. That's the truth. So if you're thinking ahead to the future, there's possibility for fear to creep in. And then if you're thinking about maybe what happened, you're thinking about a negative scenario, that can creep into the present moment too. So it creeps in on either sides of the present moment. So you always want to try to be in the moment if possible. And I mean, my big thing with athletes too is you have to stay away from results. You have no control over results. You only have control over, you know, what you do in the moment, the process, how you do it. So if you're focusing on results, it's a massive distraction, and it causes all sorts of bad feelings too, or you know, negative emotions. So that's another thing you have to work on, you know, as an athlete or as a performer is being in the moment only on the process of how you're doing something. And then you get the result. If you do it properly and you do it well and you have joy while you're doing it, you get the result. So you don't have to worry about the result ever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in those situations where you're under pressure is kind of where that fear starts creeping in on both sides, right? Like, oh, I missed my last shot. What if I miss this next one? Or I've made a bunch. Do you know what I mean? So like, why why do some people crumble under pressure? I remember when I was, again, back drumming, when I was practicing, there were certain things I could do that when I was performing in front of people, I just couldn't do anymore, you know? And I think there was this pressure factor that made me crumble. And like, what's happening when people crumble under pressure?
So if you had maybe a different approach or a different perspective when you were drumming, like, I can't wait to get out there tonight. You know, there's an opportunity. Maybe there's somebody in the crowd watching you that could give you an opportunity with a band or something like that. Pressure does exist. First of all, it's something that really it's an opportunity. It creates meaning in what you're doing, right? Always. It means that it's meaningful. It means something. It's not training. It's somebody's saying, hey, this is important and this is meaningful. So go ahead. Let's see what you got, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the athlete, the performer, whatever, always creates the pressure though. So you can create good pressure and you can create bad pressure. That's the problem. So if you're creating bad pressure, which you are creating,
Mm-hmm.
sorry, Jeremy.
It's all good.
So you are creating the bad pressure, right? But you can look at any situation and create the good pressure too. So I just interviewed, actually, in the book that I'm writing, and it's for equestrians. It's really interesting. But I interviewed the best equestrians in the world, all who have won Olympic gold medals. And we talked a lot about pressure. And we talked about, you know, I asked them about good and bad pressure. And good pressure really is about looking at something as an opportunity. Always, this is an amazing opportunity. This will give me this and this and this and this, and I can't wait to test my training. This is an opportunity to test my training and really show people what I can do. Bad pressure would be, everyone's watching. What happens if I screwed up? What happens if I fail? What happens if I don't do it? What happens if my training's not good enough? And the performer themselves is creating the bad pressure and the bad feelings. So you really have to have the right, I mean, part of my job too is creating perspective around pressure. So a lot of my athletes are in the Olympics or, you know, in the NBA or NFL or professional sports or whatever it is, the Super Bowl, for example. Like, what do you do, right? It's a big game. It could change your life if you win the game and play well in it.
Yeah.
So you have to create great, good pressure for yourself and look at it in the right perspective. So it becomes perspective. Does pressure exist? Some people say it doesn't exist. It does exist. Any athlete will tell you that pressure is real and it exists, but it's your job to create good pressure and kind of put negative pressure, the potential of negative pressure, on the shelf. So, and that's it. And what you were doing when you were drumming was, the mindset was sort of negative, and you were creating bad pressure for yourself. What happens if this happens? What happens if I don't do well? What happens if I screw up? There's all these people here. Instead of creating the really good pressure, I can't wait to get out there and show people I love this music, I love these tunes, I can't wait to get out there and do it. So that's sort of, you know where I'm going with it though, right? There's more
Yeah.
to it. There's more
Yeah.
to it than that, but that's sort of a Reader's Digest version of pressure.
Yeah, and it's interesting because you talk about values, and I think again my values back then were just in the wrong place. Where, I mean, I thought I
Absolutely.
would have been able to get a girlfriend because I was a great drummer, so that's like an extrinsic motivation. Where if I was to just have genuinely loved drumming and performing in the moment, then I think I would have been better. So it's like there's almost this innate difference in, do I actually really love drumming? Which I think as I matured, I realized that that wasn't necessarily the case. I do enjoy it, but I wasn't intrinsically motivated to just do it all the time. And, like I remember there was a big difference between the amazing musicians, and the difference was that they loved every second they practiced. It wasn't a burden to them or anything. It was all an opportunity to get better at what they did. And I remember it kind of not really understanding that, where I was just like, the practice is it's a grind for me, and I had to force myself to do it. And then only once I've kind of matured, I've kind of guided myself towards doing the things that I am naturally inclined to do, like reading about sports psychology and this and that, and podcasting, so
Yeah. You have to love it, Jeremy. That's really a big thing. You have to love it. If you're going to do it and really master a craft, you have to love it. I mean, it's a big part of it. And if you don't love it, then it's going to be difficult for you, because then the purpose and the values and all those things come into it. And isn't it interesting what you said too? See the way the things are all weaving together now, right? All these
yeah.
pieces weave together. When I wrote this book on confidence, I wrote it in 12 chapters, but all the pieces are so woven together. Pressure, comfort zone, fear, the structure, the voice, all these pieces are so interlinked and woven together that you're totally right. And you just link pressure with values. And there's a definitive link there between pressure and values, because that's what you believe in. So if push comes to shove and you're under pressure, you really have to understand clearly what you believe in. And if you do, then you can create good pressure. If not, you might create bad pressure. I'll give you an example, just a really simple example. I went to see an athlete for the first time because of COVID this past weekend. I went to see them perform live. So I sat with them and I said, before they performed, I said they were performing in not a big competition, but it's a competition, so there is some pressure. So I said, you can look at this in two ways, and let's talk about, good pressure and bad pressure. So I'm here with you today live for the first time. We've been using Zoom. We've been using all these things over the past 4 to 5 months, but I'm here live with you today. So you can look at that as good or bad pressure. You can say, oh my God, John is with me for the first time today live. I have to do well. I've got to show him that I can really do it. And what we're working on is really working and it's really great. And you can look at that, that's bad pressure. Or you can look at it another way and say, it's great that John's here today live, because he can come down with me and see things that are going to help me become better at what I do.
Mm-hmm.
So if you can look at the difference between those, the second one's good pressure. Wow, I'm happy John's here because he's going to maybe spot something live that can help me tomorrow become better at what I do. Versus the other one where, oh my God, John's here. that's bad pressure. So you can see how the athlete can immediately create this bad pressure, or they can create good pressure, and it's the same situation, right? Depending on how you look at it. So it's a perspective, and that's the way you have to kind of consume pressure, right? And look at
Mm-hmm.
pressure is in the way of good and bad pressure, and are you creating good pressure for yourself?
Interesting. What would you do in a situation if you started to find that these people are, or let's say you had a client who was in it for the wrong reasons and doing it to kind of get acceptance from their parents or something, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I'd warn them about, where this, because I've seen it a million times. So
Okay.
I could tell them how, generally where it's going to end up, right? Burnout. If you're doing it for the wrong reasons, you're not going to probably get the outcome or the results that you're looking for. It's just too difficult. You have to, every single performer, anyways, that I work with who has done well loves it. They
Mm-hmm.
love to train. They love the pressure. They love pressure. Like a
Mm-hmm.
lot of people, they just run away from it. And these people all run towards it. They're like, okay, this means something. I
Yeah.
get to do something that really has meaning. So let's do it the best we possibly can and excel at it, right?
Hmm.
So, but you're totally right. I mean, part of my job, if somebody hires me and I'm kind of going along, and I get into some really interesting conversations with athletes too, Jeremy, on should I quit or should I not quit?
Mm-hmm.
So let's say somebody, some of my athletes are top two in the world, top three in the world, but somebody gets to top 50 in the world, and then they start struggling that they can't get any further. So then the conversation starts, should I quit? Should I stop? Because I'm just struggling to, but a lot of it is around, I don't really want to travel anymore. I don't like the
Mm-hmm.
traveling or the grind of being on the road all the time, or the staying in hotels by myself, and all these issues that sometimes really leak into why they may not be doing as well as they would like, right?
Yeah.
Maybe all of those reasons, and maybe you can relate it to your drumming too in some way, right? Some of these types of discussions we're having right now. And we can talk about that if you want. I'm happy to talk to you about that too, because I think it's interesting. You were a drummer, you were a performer, right?
Yeah.
So that's interesting. But I find though that a lot of those things will hold back the athlete from maybe getting to top 10 in the world. They have the talent? Yes, they've definitely got the talent, but there's things around the mindset that are holding them back. And it could be, you know, I'm getting burned out. I've been doing this. I don't think I'm doing it for the right reasons anymore. I don't think I'm not making enough money doing it. All these things that pop up. And then the discussion starts. Should I continue or not? Should I quit? Should I continue? Should I start thinking about doing something else? And then the transition, that's when my job working on the transition with them, I may do that. Like we may decide we're done. Now it's time to transition into something else. What else would you like to do? You're a high achiever. There's other things you love in life. So now let's start looking at those things and move you into something that you might want to do more than what you're doing right now. Being a professional athlete and being 50th in the world at something. I mean, that's not bad, but they're not happy doing it.
Yeah. It's really interesting because again, I just see this correlation where that's not just related to sports, that's related to your job and your career and your relationships, you know?
I just had a friend of mine, Melinda Harrison. She's from Toronto, and she just wrote a book. And don't ask me, the name of the book has escaped me, but it's a fantastic book on transition in everything.
Cool.
And we make so many transition in our lives, right? From different things to different things. You've done it, like you've done it probably a number of times, right? You're always transitioning into something different.
Yeah.
And you have all these different identities in your life too. And, are any of them more important than others? Well, no, they're all important. Each identity that you have is important. And that's a big issue for another podcast again, is this whole issue of athlete identity and what that means and how difficult that can be too. Because typically, I know I was known as John the golfer.
Yeah.
Like that was what everybody knew me as when I was growing up. There's John the golfer. It's not John the son or John the, you know, the student, or John the, it's always John the golfer. So you become known to yourself as John the golfer. So that's your primary identity. And that's a problem. That's a big problem that athletes have to deal with, because once they stop doing it and that identity kind of ends, you lose all the things that were attached to that identity too, and all these accolades or whatever came with it. So that's interesting too, that
I
whole
guess
transition.
it's like the building blocks of your self-worth can't just be based on your performance as a golfer. It's got to be your
If it is, you're in
lovingness and
trouble.
your, what's that?
Yeah. I said, if it is, you're in big trouble.
Yeah.
You really are, because we all have many identities, right? You're a son, you're, you know, if you have a girlfriend or a wife, you're a husband or a boyfriend, and you're all sorts of different things to different people. So you have many different identities, and they're all important, and you have to nurture them all. So if there's this primary identity that follows you around, and your self-worth is built on that identity, and that is all crumbles and taken away, and you can imagine the difficulty with that. So you have to be careful of that too, for sure.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
I've heard that you go to Disney World every year. Can you tell me a little bit about that and why you do that?
Yep. So that's sort of my contribution to the community. And every year we have it's an event. It's called the Serge Giroux Golf Dream. And originally we call it the Tiger Woods Golf Dream. But the first boy we took on the trip to Disney World was, I'm telling you, Jeremy, he was such an impressive boy. He was funny. He was smart. He was kind. He was just the nicest kid. It's like if you had a son, you'd want your son to be him. And so he died when he was 16. He had cancer. So every year we take between 2 and 4 families away for this super amazing dream trip, where we partner with Disney and we partner with some partners in Florida, and we take the families from typically the Ottawa, Outaouais region, because that's where I live. And we take them away for a week. And Serge was the first one. So all the kids have life-threatening illnesses, and we've seen so many different illnesses, from cancer to sickle cell anemia to all sorts of different really nasty diseases, right, that impact not only the child, but the family too, in such a big way.
Yeah.
So each year we take from 2 to 4 families on this dream trip, and we've been doing it for about 20 years now, and it's phenomenal. I mean, it's changed me. It's the best thing I do. Like if you ask me, I get to work with the best athletes in the world and CEOs and everything, but that does not compare to being able to do this for a family and seeing they go through this torture at the hospital for sometimes a year, 2 years, 3 years, whatever the amount of time is. And then they have the opportunity to go on this trip for a week, and they just cut loose, right? Mm-hmm. And I bring a lot of really cool, fun people on the trip too. So we have this fantastic time with the family. So we go on the trip every year, and it's very cool. I highly recommend that if you can, anybody who's listening to the podcast, if you can give back something like that, that will be the best thing you'll do in your life, for sure. It's by far the best thing I do.
Yeah, that's something that as I mature and grow older, I'm starting to realize that all of the, I guess, podcasts I listen to on mindset and happiness and fulfillment, it's always the same key, that contribution is the secret, you know?
Giving is a big thing. If you get so much more giving than you do getting back. Like I get so much from this. I'm telling you, it's incredible when I give, how much you get back, like from doing something like that. And it occupies the mind. It's positive. You're doing something really good for not only one person, but for a family, and then extending out from there too, right? And it's really cool too, Jeremy, the way sort of the mind works and the brain works. We give people something to look forward to too. And it really is a positive, really a super positive thing. So we tell the people a year out that we're doing this.
Cool.
So it really helps the child heal too. Even physically, it seems the children, by the time we go on the trip, are feeling much better because they've looked forward to this positive thing all year long. And so is the family. So looking forward to something, I think, is really important. And
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah, thanks for asking about that.
Yeah,
It's
absolutely.
super fun. I'm sure Charity told you about that.
Charity did tell me about it. Yeah, and the more I thought about it, I was like, yeah, that's such an amazing thing that I guess, like I said, I'm starting to learn contribution and giving is so much. Like recently, I started this thing called Miles for Mental Health, where I'm a runner. So there's this program called Drop the Puck Official. They're doing this thing from all of August, where every dollar or every $2 donated, I have to run a mile, and just the people that have donated have reached out, and all the contributions go to the Canadian Mental Health Association, so everybody that's reached out, it's hard to describe the amazing feeling I get from that, where when you kind of stop and you're worried that you don't know what you're doing and you have some self-doubt, then there's this automatic, like, oh, I'm doing this thing and it's helping people. I do have meaning, and it's such an
There's a
amazing.
joy in it. You know what? There's a joy in it. And there's a difference. Trust me, there's a difference between joy and happiness. Joy is sustainable, and it's something that it's like the inside out thing I talked about. It. You get the feeling from the inside out. Most of the time, happiness is created by things outside of yourself, and it's very fleeting, right? I'm happy. Something great happens. I'm sad. I'm happy. I'm sad. All these things are happening to you all the time, and you're happy or sad, but the joy that you get from that feeling is different. Like joy and happiness are different feelings. Joy is just this sustainable, really amazing feeling you have inside of yourself that is so good. And only things like that can create it, I think. Money can't create it. Like
Yeah,
it can create some happiness, maybe, it's
yeah,
fleeting, you buy something or whatever. But the joy you get from things like that is pretty priceless. It's nice. So I'm glad you're on that track too. That's good.
thanks, man. Yeah, it's really cool. I mean, what I say this podcast is all about is kind of extracting golden nuggets of wisdom from high performers, is what I call it. And I think I came into this expecting to hear golden nuggets just about sports performance. I didn't expect it to go this route, which is really cool. But I think there's an amazing golden nugget in that, I guess, long-term joy versus short-term happiness.
Totally right. And even, if we move back to sports for a minute, Jeremy, everything is in the fundamentals. Everything is in the structure. There's no tricks and tips to things. Like none of my business or the work I do is about tricks and tips and getting kind of very short-term things, right? We're always going for sustainable, consistent performance, and you do that through fundamental structural pieces that require work. You have to build the habits. It takes time. You have to be patient. It's just not something that you just sort of wipe a brush over and all of a sudden you're a great performer, right? Because it just takes time. And when you look at the technical piece, to try to get that's important. The physical piece, to support the technical piece is really key. The strategic piece, understanding what you're doing, like for drumming, understanding the nuances of drumming and how to do it, and listening to all sorts of amazing artists and everything, and the sort of the tactical and the strategic piece of what you were doing with drumming. And then there's the mental and the emotional piece that sort of prop up the others, and they're all important. Like all
Hmm.
these pieces are critical and they all go together. There's not one that's any more or less important than the other. You have to have them all if you're going to be great at what you do.
Hmm.
So the mental and the emotional piece, I think, becomes a little bit more important as you progress, because you hit walls and you have to be able to get over those walls. And if you have the mental and the emotional piece, you can get over those walls. I find a lot of athletes, they're so great technically, so great physically, so great strategically, but sometimes they hit the walls and they can't get over them. They stop and the career shortens or it ends or whatever. So you need that mental and emotional knowledge, development to get over those walls and get to that next level. And the levels become harder to get to as you become better, right? As you know, right? If you want
Yeah.
to be the world's greatest drummer, um, it's a long haul and it's difficult to get to those levels. I always love the guy for Def Leppard, the drummer for Def
The
Leppard
one-handed
with
guy.
one arm.
Yeah.
That that is high performance. When you
No
talk
kidding.
about a guy drumming, have you seen some of the Def Leppard drum solos?
Oh yeah,
One
absolutely.
arm, Jeremy,
Yeah, it's crazy.
incredible.
Yeah. Talk about hurdles or walls. Yeah, absolutely. That's a big wall.
No kidding. Yeah, just the thought of that is inspiring, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, those walls are interesting. You know, there's always going to be something. And I remember something I took again from your book was that um, you talked about your drive being something that you were super comfortable with, and then other parts of your game you weren't. And I find that even with my drumming, I would go in and instead of practicing what I knew I needed to get better at, I would just start doing what I was good at. You know, and
Right.
I think that that was really interesting and drawing the line between that's the difference between a high performer and an average performer is someone who's going to seek out those differences or those challenges that they need to hurdle over and focus on it and work on it and not just do what they're already good at, you know, because it's easy.
I agree with you. And that's the discipline again, right? Having the discipline to, first of all, having the self awareness to identify what you're really good at and what you're not good at, and making sure that I think you want to work on your strengths too, but you want to put yourself in a position where the weaknesses don't, or the limitations, they don't hurt you. They, when the pressure's on, that they don't limit you or hurt you. They're never going to be your strengths. My driving in golf, I was never going to have anything that would challenge that as far as what I was good at.
Yeah.
I was really good at it, but I really needed to bring up the other parts to make them serviceable, which I think is really important. It would be the same in your drumming, right? You may not be great at a certain part of drumming. You may never be great at it. The more you could practice your whole life and never be as great as your strength,
Yeah.
but you need to make them serviceable. And so there's so much in there that you just talked about. There's the self-awareness to know what your strengths and limitations are, so you know what to work on, the discipline, and then the comfort zone to push the edges, right? You need to understand how to push those edges so that you're developing that comfort zone, and you don't stay in that nice little comfort zone just, with your things you did well in your drumming. You just stay there and you just ignore these other things that were holding you back.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot attached to that, and we brought a lot of them in this conversation.
Yeah, totally. It's all kind of come for full circle. And I think that's the perfect note to end on, John. I really appreciate your time.
Jeremy, it's my pleasure. It sounds like you're going to do really well. You're a natural at this. No,
Thank you.
seriously, this was a conversation, right? A
Yeah.
podcast is about a conversation. It's not about having a list of questions. Seriously. And you're a natural at it. Like, you did really well, and it was a conversation, and the questions grew out of the conversation. So I think you're going to do really well at this. I like
Oh,
it.
thank you. I appreciate that. If I need some advice, maybe I'll send you an email and you can be my coach.
Anytime,
Yeah.
anytime. I'm
Awesome.
happy to help you anytime. I would love to. Yeah. So
Cool.
I'll keep in touch with you too, and I'll follow
Awesome.
your other podcasts. I look forward to listening to them.
For sure. Awesome. Yeah. Well, thanks again. I'll let you continue on into your busy day. I've heard a few emails pop up there. I'll let you get back to those, but super appreciate your time. It was a pleasure.
Sounds great. My pleasure.
All right. Thanks, John.